What is the best mid-range impact driver? The D Willie, the Makita T, or the Wilk Dickey Milwaukee base model? So we're going to start out by conducting a few tests. Then we're going to, of course, tear them down, which is the part that I'm always excited about. Then we're going to give them a score, like a Doug score, but instead a Jason score for tools in these different categories, the performance and all that stuff. So we're going to start with a torque test. Yes, I finally got this stupid torque dyno working. It took me a couple of months to get all the wrinkles ironed out of it, but it's finally accurate and calibrated. So here we go. That's all she's got. 130. Wow. Okay, and you can see the Mill Willie came out on top, followed by the D Willie, and then the Makita Willie. I wasn't too surprised. This is actually a less expensive tool than these two too. So, and as you're going to see, well, the test itself is going to revolve around the DeWalt. Okay, the second test, this is the handling test. Now I know that this is not a great handling test, but I've used all these tools quite extensively, so I have a good idea of how they handle and how they perform and all that stuff. Okay, so you just saw this one, and this one also did this one. You know, it really boils down to the weight of the tool, and then there's some ergonomic factors with the design and the handle. I'm going to talk about those later. The DeWalt is the most comfortable tool. It's certainly a matter of personal preference. I just like the way the DeWalt feels in my hand. It feels a little bit more expensive. There's a little more meat. There's contours right here, right, where there's no contours here. And then for some reason the Makita is just, it's light, but it's just not a particularly wonderful feeling tool. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to do some drag racing. Charged. Ready, set. There. Two, three. And then, of course, the Milwaukee comes out on top, followed by the D Willie and then the Makita. And then the next test that we're going to conduct is the power dyno. See how much horsepower these things put out.
Here we go.
Perfect. So I just did the DeWalt. I'm going to do the other ones later, but the DeWalt, it's a powerful SOB, and I don't understand why that doesn't translate to real world power, but the motor itself, it squirts out a heap of juice, and what that just means in my mind is it's going to suck batteries down faster than these two. So, you know, whatever. Take that with a grain of salt. And then the next test is going to be the RPM test. So we're going to test to see if the specs on the box match the specs of the workbench. So $29.91, and I'm just going to test this tool. There will be tests for these separately where you can see the RPMs. I just don't want to jam too much nonsense into one video. Now we've torn off the petticoats. We can see the juicy bits below. So, like I said, the review is really going to revolve around the D-Willy Max, because that's the one we're going to give it a score to in the end. But we're going to kind of compare it to all three. So, starting with the build quality of the clamshell. You can see all the smut and black nastiness it's built up just from the little bit of time that I've used it. That's interesting. So here's the stamp, the maker mark, the clamshell, the poly plastic. So it's PA6 30GF. You know, they all are basically. That's fiberglass reinforced nylon. This one's the same, the PA6. Dang, I'm dropping all my screws. And then this one, I'm fairly sure is going to be the same. Let's see if we can't do it real gently. So yeah, PA6 30. So this is TPS. So this is thermoplastic styrene, and that is nitrile rubber. It's got a styrene molecule on the end of the poly chain. So this overmold is nitrile rubber. The overmold on this one's TPE. So thermoplastic elastomer, that's butylene. Butylene's a little bit softer, feels better, and that's the reason that this was a more comfortable tool when I was talking about kind of the ergonomics and design. And then this one does it say? It has to say. Why you no tell? So the Japanese, another interesting thing, it's not really interesting, but it is a thing. These screws are the JIC screws. So they look like Phillips heads, but Phillips heads just don't fit in them. You screw them all up trying to get these screws out with Phillips head, or at least I did. I think that this is butylene too. Butylene is a little bit softer. The problem with butylene is you get petroleum on it. It gets all warpy and nasty and stinky, and starts to off-gas butyric acid, which is the same thing that makes vomit stink. So it turns into vomit once you get petroleum on it. So moving up from the bottom, you see these little terminal strips, these little blades. They look copper plated, whereas these are probably nickel plated, I would say. A little bit cheaper. These are a little bit beefier and heavy duty. Comparing the gauge of wire, as you can see, this is a little chunky. It's got some chunky monkey wire in it. So heavier gauge than this. And then this, holy sweet Mary, Mother, and Joseph, this thing has got, so all the electronicals are potted in this little thing down here. You can see a balancing cap sticking out of it. And then it has an honest to God fuse, like an automotive big bus fuse. I've never seen that before. Quite interesting. But you can also see that the power leads are a little bit smaller than this one. So this one is designed to deliver more power. I would say it could reliably sustain more of the durka. If you give it to it hard and heavy, then it just flows electrons better through bigger gauge wire. And then it's got the thermal overload wire, so protection. That's for the thermal protection, so it kills the power in case things get out of hand. And we're going to move. Golly, look at all the sophisticated guts sticking out of that. That's crazy. Then this is potted. Wow, it's really, really nice. So PPE, that's polypropylene, polypropylene, PPE. Let me figure out what that is. It's polyethylene ester, ether, polyphenylene, an amorphous polyplastic, thermoplastic. So this is for high heat resistance, and it's probably maybe this is a two-part epoxy potting compound. Oh, I'm supposed to be talking about this too. Dang, I'm getting off track. So we're going to look at the switch, the potentiometer. You see there's no bellow to protect from dust ingress, whereas the cheat Ryobi that we reviewed, it had the bellow, much more expensive. So this is so all the brains of this brushless motor in here. So it's an electronic speed controller, basically a pulse wave modulator. And I've got this PWM board for a brushless motor that we're going to check out, see exactly how these brushless motors operate. But they've crammed all of this into this tiny little switch. And when it comes to switches, this one feels great. The Makita's got the best feelings. None of them got no clicky. I like the clicky. But this one's just got a real smooth delivery. Milwaukee feels good too. But I can't believe that all the guts and all the brains and all the doings are in here. You can see this big old gigantic diode to prevent when the inductive load. This is a brushed. This is a brushed motor. That's why there's no gut. Who would have figured? So the DeWalt Max is a brushed DC motor. Well, holy crap. That's why it's so much simpler than all of this. Wow, that's crazy. So this is a brushed DC motor. That explains why it draws so much power compared to these other two too. Okay, everything's coming together now. That's why it's got bigger, beefier wires. Yes, interesting. So D-Willie's mid-range tool is brushed. I bet nobody even knows that. And this is okay. Yeah, okay. All right. Interesting. Okay, so getting up to the beans and potatoes, the Franken beans of it. You can see the brushed assembly. It's got some big old gnarly brushes. These are like the same size brushes that you would find on AC tools. Oh, this is no bueno. They got these spade connectors. What a cheap thing to do. Not a fan of those. Vibration, dust. Anytime these things get to wiggling and jiggling, that increases the resistance and decreases the efficiency. Look at this. Look at that little Junior Mint wire. That almost looks like a mistake. Like they ran out of the right size wire and they decided to just put whatever they had left. Dang, it's hard to believe that little bitty baby wire right there can handle all the juice that the thing's squirting out. So these are probably carbon graphite brushes, and this is probably brass, little housings for it. And it uses these little spring steel wires to keep tension. I just can't believe that they would use these cheap spade connectors. And it's just a two brush. Of course, brush motors are all single phase, but the rigid, it had 4 brushes. It's just single phase, but it had 4 brushes. So a more expensive design. Another interesting thing that I just noticed is look at all the meat right here. Man, it's got a bunch of meat, but the overmold is a little thinner on the D-Willy. And then looking at the brushed motor, it sure is brushed. Look at that. So this is the stator ring, permanent magnet stator ring. You can see it's encased in, looks like polycarbonate. Probably a polycarbonate shell, because then you can see it's multiple magnet segments. And then these laminates, steel laminates to make out the, and then you've got this. So if we could count the number of turns, we could tell exactly what the torque versus the RPM of the motor is. And you see all these comm bars. It's actually got a physical ball bearing, which is nice, on the end instead of this. Well, these all probably do. Yeah, they all have a steel bearing, whereas the Ryobi, it had an oilite bushing, just a cheaper design. And you see these laminates and the armatures of the rotor assembly. Sometimes they'll pot all of these turns epoxy. So they'll coat these with epoxy, keep dust from building up in there and messing up the performance. You see they got a little balancing. They take a little drill and go bip, and that's how they balance these rotors. Because when you're spinning 30,000 rip'ems and you get out of line, you got problems. Quick, fast, and in a hurry. Oh, whoopsie doodle. And then, of course, there's a powdered metal pinion on the end. And then we've got the gearbox. I wonder how we can get into it without breaking everything. You can see they just lathered on the grease. It's actually squirting out of it somewhere. I don't know where. That's never a really great sign when you got grease skeeting out the back of the gearbox. I'm sure that the design is like identical. It's a single speed ring gear, and then you got the planetaries, and then that actually drives the hammer and the anvil. These are the auto coupling, so you can just yeet it down in there, whereas the Milwaukee does not have that feature. And then the Makita does. So absolutely unequivocally a much cheaper tool. Lower performance, higher watt output. It's just hard to, hard to reconcile that, unless you're a DeWalt fan. So I reckon that's it. Now it's time to give it a Jason score. So performance, I gave it a 7.5. Ergonomics, it's an incredibly comfortable tool. I gave it an 8. Build quality, it's just, it seems good, but compared to these other tools, it's not as great. I give it a 7.5 build quality. Electronics, there's nothing special about them. I give it a 7 in electronics. Innovation, there ain't a lick of innovation in this tool anywhere. So I'm going to give it a 6 in innovation. The value, I don't know. I give it probably a 7 in value. And then you can see the total here. If you don't agree with the review that I left, go to our website, review.wfskills. Leave your own review. Or you can go check out this review and more on our website. Thanks for tuning in. Until next time, sayonara.